Now, I told you to remember what I said about investor purchases being at the lowest level in the last 15 years. Well, there was a story that just came out that kind of directly contradicts that. They say more bad news for home buyers. Real estate investors are ramping up purchases again. Now, there's some truth to this and some of it is a lie, and I will explain. They say that real estate investors are ramping up their purchases as of the third quarter of 2025 because 30% of all single-family homes were bought by investors, according to Cotality. That was formerly CoreLogic. They have pretty reliable data on the U.S. housing market. And the company defines an investor as a buyer owning 3 or more properties. Now, a year ago, investor purchases were 27% of all single-family homes. So did it go up a little bit? Yeah, from 27 to 30%. But here is where they're not telling you the full story, because nowhere in this story did they mention the fact that regular buyer demand has completely dropped off a cliff. So maybe it's not that home builders are buying more, it's just that their share, their percentage of homes that they're buying has increased naturally because the regular home buyer is nowhere to be found right now. They don't want to tell you that part. They want to make you scared, give you FOMO again, to give people who have been on the sidelines and been waiting patiently and saving diligently, improving the credit score, all the stuff I talk about on the channel. They want you to freak out and go out and buy right now because the housing market's so slow. These stories are spun in a way to make you feel that way. And on this channel, I'm never aiming to make you feel a certain way. I'm giving you the facts and laying it out the way it is and letting you decide for yourself how you want to react and use that information. Now, according to this data, they say that investors were most active in states like Missouri, Mississippi, and Nevada, in the most affordable markets in these states. And nearly 20% of home purchases in Missouri were made by an investor. But it seems like these investors never really learn, because one thing I do believe from this report is that investors are also paying significantly more from the houses they're purchasing than a normal person who would be living in the house, an owner-occupant. According to Realtor.com, in Utah, they say investors paid on average 35% more for a property than the typical home buyer did. And in California, they paid 23% more. And in New York, it was 12% more. I mean, these guys are fools, guys. Let them go ahead and lose all their money, you know? We've already seen it happen with Zillow and Opendoor and all these other iBuyer programs that thought they were going to get rich flipping properties and instead went bust. But I think part of the issue is that so many of these investment firms are backed by pretty substantial capital that is looking for a home. You know, there's a lot of money out there from a lot of people who are wealthy, and they're looking for places to put that money. And these investment firms are probably promising unrealistic returns that they're never going to be able to realize. The experts believe that part of the reason that these investors are paying substantially more is because they're planning on turning these properties into like an Airbnb situation, or they're competing in a market with very little inventory. Like, investors typically don't do that. You know, investors go for low-hanging fruit. And that's why investor activity has been suppressed as much as it has been right now compared to how it was over the past 15 years. But these investors do create problems for owner-occupant buyers who are looking for a place to live, because the more that they overpay for a house, the more it affects the comps in the neighborhood, and the more sellers think that their house is worth, and the more they can ultimately ask. But the problem is those investors have the money to pay those premiums and take a chance on the property, whereas the everyday average home buyer does not. And so this is probably just going to create a situation in these markets where home sales falter even further as the average person becomes even more priced out. But make no mistake, those investors will realize at some point in the near future that those houses are not going to turn the profit that they were hoping for. A lot of Airbnb people have already been going bust over the past couple of years, losing sizable portions of their short-term rental business, and making money off of them as a traditional rental is next to impossible right now, especially when you're paying 35% more than the average home buyer. You know, you have to pay less than the average home buyer to even have a shot at turning a profit these days. But the housing market has so